many of you are generous to go off camera, and but feel free to go off camera because this is recorded and will be shared with the public. But it was really nice that you guys all came on camera just to say hello and wave in the beginning there. So always feel reach out to us as you need throughout the session to any and one of the presenters or even ourselves here at Wine 211 by going to the website, and there is a contact us button that you can either contact us through there. So again, thank you for joining this afternoon, being a part of this learning series throughout the year. If this is your first time, we look to see you next week. There's a few other sessions coming up. But I wanted to give the floor to Sophie and Meta to kickstart us on user-centered analysis today. So welcome to the floor, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kausal. Meta, maybe let me go through the land acknowledgement, and then let's introduce ourselves, and then we'll get into what we're going to be doing today. So Meta and I both work with a nonprofit evaluation consultancy called Logical Outcomes. We are based in a place that we now call Toronto, on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Toronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. As people who live and work in this place, we acknowledge our responsibility to respect and uphold the treaties that govern this land. These include Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We also recognize the enduring relevance of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement, a treaty between Indigenous nations in the Great Lakes region that binds the peoples who inhabit this land to share it well and protect it. Next slide. So let's just introduce ourselves, and then I'll just say a few words about Logical Outcomes. So my name is Sophie Llewellyn, and I'm the Director of Evaluation with Logical Outcomes. And I'm just going to admit right now that my background is in anthropology and capacity development. And I'm not a data scientist by training. So we're going to tell you all about data visualization today. And I feel like I need to admit to you that my background is mostly in qualitative research, and I've learned a lot of this on the job. And part of the reason I'm telling you this is because if you're also not a data scientist, but you're a person who works with data, you can do this too. And that's what we're going to get into today. Meda?
Hi, Sophie. Thanks for that. And also to say that, like if you have a lot of experience and you are a data scientist, please feel free to like put stuff in the comments, like ask questions, provide inputs, give examples. Like we want this to be interactive, and we recognize that a lot of folks on this call have a lot of experience and expertise. So we want to make sure we're also hearing from you. So feel free to jump in. My name is Medha. I work at Logical Outcomes with Sophie as a research and evaluation associate. And yeah, really excited to be doing this workshop with all of you today. To everybody who's come back, it's really nice to see you all again. And of course, everyone who's come for the first time, it's really great to have you join, and hopefully you find this useful and helpful in your work.
Meta and I have both been looking forward to this session since we started with these workshops because we get to look at really cool charts together and talk about how to make them. So yeah, let's leap into it. Just a note about procedure, I suppose. I love an active chat. And I really like to receive questions as we're going along. We have a couple of places where we're going to pause for some interaction and to hear from people. But as we're going through the material that we're sharing, I would just also welcome people to ask questions in the chat. I have the chat window open, and since there's two of us, we can help one another to be responsive. If we find that we're just enmeshed in like really deep and rich conversation, but we're not progressing in our presentation, I know that Keishan and Kosal will help us to move forward, and we may put our conversation on pause so that we can move through the material.
Sorry, what is that?
Keishan, if you could mute
do you have
folks,
the
that would be
templates?
great.
Yeah, already.
Yeah, so what I usually do is confirm, and then I have a
Yvonne,
debate
we can hear
with
you. If you could go on mute. Thank you. Sorry to single you out that way. Okay, and feel free to unmute if you have a question or a comment as we're going through. Thank you. Okay, so what we're going to be covering today, we're going to just talk about our goals for the workshop. We want to introduce the concept of user-centered design in data visualization. We'll talk about different chart types and how do you select the right chart type. We're going to go over practices for effective data visualization and equitable data visualization, and they are very closely related, but not quite the same thing. We want to talk about disaggregation and how to do that responsibly and effectively. And finally, if we have time for it, I want to show a dashboard that we created for an outcomes measurement platform for Ontario Trillium Foundation that I think there's some interesting stories around how that dashboard was created, and we could just talk about some of the choices made there. So our goals today are to support folks who are participating in the call, to tell clear stories with data, to work with numbers, including small numbers, responsibly and effectively, and to disaggregate data in ways that reveal important patterns and that honor the communities that you serve. We're going to be before I get into this, we're going to be talking, very nuts and bolts today about data visualization because we're both practitioners, we're both evaluators, and we do a lot of data visualization in our work. And our assumption is that many of the folks on this call do similar work and use data visualization on a regular basis. So it is a fairly practical kind of tour of different chart types and what have you. So before we move further, I just wanted to ask this big question: why visualize data? And if any of you have ever, looked at data in tabular form and squinted at it and tried to extract a story from it, then you already know the answer to this question. We visualize data because results are much more persuasive when they're presented in charts. Charts and graphs add credibility to our data stories, even when we're just using them to illustrate a larger narrative that we're making in text or in a presentation. There's something very special about being able to kind of show the evidence behind the point that you're making. And to the point, visualizing our data helps us to communicate a point. So it's really critical that when we're coming up with a data visualization, that we begin with that point. We know what the point is, and we're trying to illustrate that point and bring it to life and really make it pop for our users in a visual way. Oh, and I see that Aaliyah says a picture is worth 1,000 words, and that is very well said. It's very true. With it's worth 1,000 data points as well. So why user-centered design? So user-centered design, it comes out of like industrial design. It's grounded in empathy for the user and a respect for their needs, their goals, their workflows, their orientation to a system that they're navigating or a product that they're using. The focus is on usability, so making it easy for people to use that system or that product to accomplish their goals. And it's achieved by involving users in design and development, like through a co-design process, and testing and refining over time and iterating as you go. And a well-known kind of classic example of user-centered design is the OXO Good Grips vegetable peeler and this is from, in an industrial design context, but apparently the OXO vegetable peeler was developed by a person whose wife had arthritis. And so he would see her, struggling to use conventional tools to do everyday tasks. And that peeler was, rather than just taking a design that was out there already and applying it to make a new vegetable peeler, the peeler started at the pain points, like the literal pain points that this person was experiencing as she was doing the everyday task of peeling her vegetables. And it was co-created through testing, through research, with the idea that if you can make a peeler that works for people who have arthritis in their hands, it's going to work well for everybody. So I really like that example. We're talking about like user-centered design in data visualization, but the idea of starting with the pain points, recognizing the pain points, feeling empathy for the user, and working hard to make their lives easier. It's something that I think is very important to us, Mita and I, when we design charts. So what is equitable data visualization? Here we're extending the empathy that we have for the user of our data visualizations to the people whose stories we're telling in our data visualization. So we frame the visualization and we include labels, icons, and other elements in a way that communicates respect for the people and the communities who are behind the data points. And again, this is achieved in part by involving community in data visualization design. So the way that we tend to do that is by creating draft visual reports, draft charts, and testing them with folks, seeing them use if you're designing a dashboard, you watch people use the dashboard, you see where it's not feeling right for them, and then you iterate it together. In a chart and table, you want to show it to the community. You want to show those charts to the community who's being represented and get their feedback on it and make sure that it resonates for them and that they feel well represented. Okay, so getting into the process of creating effective data visualizations. This looks a little differently whether if you're making a dashboard or you're making a static data visualization that you might include in a PDF report, for example. But generally, what we want to do is define the purpose of our visualization, the audience who's coming to the visualization and using it to understand what we're trying to communicate, and the context that the audience is coming, that the audience has and that the visualization has. So we spend a lot of time thinking about the orientation of the audience for whom we're going to create a data visualization. Is this an audience that has a lot of experience using charts, or is it just a regular group of people who might see charts from time to time but don't have really high levels of data literacy? And then we design a chart that's going to work for folks. The second step is obviously collecting, exploring, preparing, cleaning your data, selecting a visualization type and a tool that you want to use for your data visualization. And a lot of the visualization that we do, we just use Excel to create it. And basically all the charts we're going to show today, you can make in Excel. So then you create your chart. And the first thing you need to do is declutter. We'll get into that in a minute. You want to test that chart with users. You want to see where people get confused, and you want to refine it. And finally, communication and sharing is the last step here, because that's what it's all about. So we're going to go through these steps. Starting with defining your purpose, context, and audience. You want to ask, what story do you want to tell with your data? That might be a story about who is being served by your organization, the range of experiences that your participants are having at your organization, the types of outcomes that are being achieved by participants or by different groups of participants. Maybe you want to look at changes in those outcomes over time as your programming has become more effective. But it's really critical to look at your data set and identify the story that you want to tell with this data in the visualization. Then you're thinking about who is your audience. So is it a funder to whom you want to present these wonderful changes and outcomes achieved over time? Is it staff who are kind of maybe monitoring participant experiences? What decisions are going to be made with this data, and how can you make it easier for folks to make those decisions by sharing the data in a way that is transparent, let's say, and compelling? And what is the best way to communicate with this audience? So what is the best chart to use? What is the best forum for communication? Is this something that's going to get posted on the internet? Or maybe you need a handout for your AGM. So we ask those questions too. I don't think we need to talk too much about collecting, exploring, and preparing the data, although that's really important. We've already talked in our last session about data collection. So I can maybe just let these points stand. And if folks want to talk about data cleaning, then we could do that a little bit later, perhaps. But I think what I want to say here is that it's important to explore the data in tabular form, obviously, before you go making extensive data visualizations. You're looking for patterns and stories in the data. You're triangulating those patterns against themes that may be coming up in other sources of data. So often we'll collect data using a mixed methods approach. We might have some interviews and focus groups and a survey, and we start to hear some similar stories as we're going through our research process. And this helps us, the qualitative research, it helps us to hone in on important stories that we're getting from our quantitative data and figure out what we want to say. And then you're figuring out which stories to prioritize and illustrate with data visualizations, because you're not going to visualize all of the data that you're collecting. Data visualization is a great way to prioritize key stories that are coming out of a research or evaluation or organizational learning process. So the third step here is finding the right chart and type, the right chart type and tool. And again, this depends on the story you want to tell, on your audience's goals in coming to the data visualization and their needs and constraints. And it depends on your study, basically, or the kind of data project that you're running. So is it a one-time insight that you're looking for, or is it a regular monitoring kind of process that you want to support with data visualization? I think this is where we get into the charts. Okay. So this is my favorite part of our presentation. We're going to look at some cool charts now. And before we go further, I just wanted to shout out Stephanie Evergreen, who is a data scientist who works in the evaluation sphere. And most of what I've learned about data visualization, I've learned from her book, Effective Data Visualization, and also from her webinars and her blog. She's just a fantastic source of information around effective user-centered data visualization. So you're going to see her name and the name of a number of different authors through this deck, and we'll share those resources at the end. Okay, so what kind of chart do you want to use when a single number is what matters most? Often we will just use a big number. So if you want to know what percentage of respondents are satisfied with the services they've received, and the data tells you it's 95%, you can just throw a great big 95% in your report, and it has meaning for people, and it's going to resonate. Sorry, I'm just looking at my notes here. Pie charts can be useful in this circumstance. I don't love to use pie charts when you're comparing many parts of a whole, or where there's a comparison involved, because humans have trouble assessing area and angle and curvature. They're much better at assessing and comparing the lengths of lines or rectangles, or the relative position of dots. And so we tend to minimize our use of pie charts at Logical Outcomes, I would say, but they can be really effective when you're reporting on the percentage of a population that does X or feels X, as long as it's really one number that matters most. And then bar charts are also a great way to do that. And we just use a ton of bar charts because people understand them. Generally speaking, they're very commonly used, and most folks know how to interpret a bar chart, and they're readily able to make those comparisons between the lengths of those rectangles in the bar chart. When you want to compare numbers, a clustered column chart is great. Or you can get a little more creative than that and do a back-to-back horizontal bar chart, where you might be comparing let's say, like pre-responses on one side and post-survey responses on the other. Or I tried using this for a retrospective post question where we said, think back to before you joined this program. What was your sense of belonging to the local community back? Or like back then, and then what is it like today? And we visualized the responses to those questions using this back-to-back approach, which can be quite effective. A slope graph is also a great way to compare numbers and to illustrate change over time between two time points. And finally, the classic line chart, as long as you don't have too many lines on it, can be a nice way to illustrate those trends. When you want to report on survey findings, many of us will just use the out-of-the-box stacked bar chart that comes with something like Microsoft Forms, and that is often just fine. But I would like to start using diverging bar charts more often because they're so cool. So here you can kind of imagine you've got your more negative responses to the left side of that dividing line, the more positive, the strong or very strong responses on the right side of the dividing line, and it's just a really nice way of making those findings really pop. Also, a number plus an icon. I've used this a lot. For example, that handout that goes out to folks at the AGM. This is a really nice way, if you can find a nice illustrative icon, a big number, it's some little context so to make sure folks really understand it. This just really communicates the findings that might come out of a survey in a nice, clear, and very accessible way. Okay. When you want to compare results by group, there are different approaches for doing this. You can use a bar chart for sure, but this is from a piece of work that that our team did a few years ago, looking at. And I don't need to get into what the comparison is or what a mover score is. That's fine. But I found that I wanted to be able. We had a pretty small sample size, and I wanted to be able to compare two different groups of clients, in this case, the scores that they had on a validated instrument. And I wanted to be able to compare it in a way that was nuanced. I didn't want to reduce these two groups of people to kind of a monolithic block. I wanted to show that there's variation among each of the scores or each of the sets of scores. And so the approach that I took, and this was just made in Excel, was a B-swarm chart. So you can see it literally shows all of the data points. And here I showed where the average, where the mean in this case was as well. But it can be, I think it's a very humane way to show data because you're showing the full spread across two different groups, and you're showing that there's internal variation within those groups as well as variation across the two different groups.
Okay. Do we want to give a little bit of disclaimer about the next one? Should I go on?
Sure. The next couple of charts we want to talk about show disparity and disparity over time, and get into just some difficult truths around racial disparity in this case the states. These may be true in Canada as well. I don't know the data well enough, but yeah. Meta, do you want to say anything else?
No, just wanted to say that before
Yeah.
we. Thanks.
So data visualization is an important tool for advocacy, as everyone here on this call knows. And I think this is a great chart for showing here this chart. It's a dumbbell dot plot, and it shows how a gap in this case between black and white infant mortality, how it changes over time. So the focus is partly on it's it's fairly complex. It's showing how in each of these populations, infant mortality is decreasing over time, but it's showing that a gap persists between Black and white families in the States, and it's showing that that gap remains too large. So I think this is a great chart type. It's a um, difficult topic, but just we wanted to get into how to use data visualization for advocacy, and this makes a really clear point. Here's another, this is a proportion plot, which really like a lot. Here, you can see on one side, the left side of the chart, that's about the proportion of population, the proportion of the share of, or the share in the of population that each of these groups kind of represents or occupies. And on the right-hand side, it's the share of, in this case, the study sample. But you can use, and it's a beautiful chart and very evocative and compelling, I think. But you can use this in many different ways, including to illustrate and bring to life different kinds of disparity that exist in our population. So you could use a chart like this to show the proportion of, let's say, white households and racialized households and Black and Indigenous households, and then the proportion of home ownership, for example, among all of those households in a community. So I think this is a very powerful chart type for talking about the way that different population groups, their share of a resource. Oh, good. So we were wondering, is there an example of a chart that folks on this call have used in the past and found very powerful in your work? So a chart type, maybe, that you found really, really useful and compelling. And you can unmute and tell us about, oh, Cedric, I want to hear about facets. Maybe we'll start with you.
Oh, yeah, I think along the topic of being responsible with data visualization, and I was actually quickly trying to find a source, but I think facets just allow people to visually separate different categories, and sometimes, especially when you're dealing with racial groups, you can come from a deficit framework when you're comparing them. And so it might be a good idea to split them into their own facets and see if they've achieved their goals that way. So I think facets are a very beautiful way. Plus, it's fun. There are tons of examples of facets.
That's awesome. I would love to see an example. So if you can find one and stick a link into the chat, that would be fantastic. Thank you. Anybody else want to share a cool or just compelling? Maybe you love pie charts and you've had great experience using them. It doesn't have to be something totally novel to everyone, but anyone else want to tell us about a good experience with data visualization?
Or it could be that you use one of these charts that Sophie shared and it worked really well for a particular kind of population. So maybe you're like, bar charts are great for X in your experience and they worked really well. We would also love to hear that.
Oh, Lauren is talking about maps, and
Mhm.
yes, I totally agree. Identifying instances, rates provincially, and situating them geographically can be helpful to show the scope variation and situate the data within the local context of community resources. Yes, I love maps too. And they're fairly easy to make in Excel as well. You can make beautiful maps with the forward sortation area. So the first three characters of a postal code, if you are able to collect that data in a survey, let's say, you can use that data within Excel to make a really lovely map.
Yeah, we can also share another example for a map in the chat, Sophie. I forgot
Oh yeah.
whenever we'd wanted to use it.
Yeah, that's true. I'm going to forget where that was coming from, but I think, Mida, if you're able to find it, that would be
Yeah.
great. And Lauren says that Tableau offers an interactive map feature. I think Tableau is famous for its really nice maps that's free and simple to create. That's great. I don't know Tableau personally. I know of it, but I haven't used it. But I've heard it makes good maps. And Isaac says that he really likes the proportion plot. Yeah, I haven't used a proportion plot either, but I'm looking for an excuse to use one. Okay, and I'm not going to click on that link that Cedric just shared because that will take me out of our presentation, but thank you for sharing that, Cedric. I'm looking forward to looking at that. Okay, Meta, do you want to chime, I think, over to you?
Yes, I'll go on, and if something comes to you, you can always use the chat. Tell us later as well. Narsin said infographic.
Agreed.
That's also another great way of communicating to your audience, especially if you're sharing it back with community members or people who took back like part in your survey. Infographics are a great way to communicate with audiences. Okay, awesome. So Sophie took us through a bunch of different chart types that we can use, and now we'll just talk a little bit about practices for effective data visualization. So these would be common to any and all charts that you would be using, right? Some common principles, practices. Sorry, I'm just looking in the chat. That you would apply. So if something comes into the chat, please let me know because I find it hard to share and look.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first one is to use an accessible or a familiar chart type, right? So we already spoke about this a little bit that, it's much easier for us to compare lines and rectangles versus very abstract shapes and areas. So using something that's, again, thinking about your audience, if you're working with academics and professors who are really good at like reading like time plots and like going into intense and difficult chart types, then sure. But if your audience is community members, maybe your staff, then you want to use something that's easy for them to use. And these are two examples. This one we really, really like is use a descriptive title that captures your main takeaway. So for example, looking at this chart, it doesn't just say heat waves, right? It actually says, what am I really trying to communicate with this chart, right? So you're respecting your viewers' times. Within like 3 seconds, they're able to get what is the main message I'm trying to convey in this chart, right? So it helps clarify the point you want to make. It helps for them to, instead of looking and be like, okay, what am I supposed to figure out from this? You're telling them what is the main message you want to communicate. So it's easier for them to remember the results, right? Easier for them to spot the result, and it's time efficient. And it also helps you be clear about the point you want to make, right? So you're really like saying it loud and clear. This is the main takeaway or the main story that I'm telling in this chart. Order the data intentionally. Again, this is quite common, and I think a lot of people do this already, but sometimes we miss it. Right? So if you have, say, many sort of categories, options in a chart, you want to order them intentionally. So maybe you want to go with frequency, like we see in the chart on the right side. It's ordered by frequency, highest to lowest. Maybe you want to order by like the strongest disagreement to the strongest agreement, like to strongly disagree to strongly agree, and you're ordering it that way, even though if the frequencies are different. Maybe you want to do it alphabetically. Maybe you want to do it by area, right? If you're showing like cities or things like that. So, but just being very intentional about the way you order the data and not just following, I guess, categories or orders that might show how things have happened over time, right? So especially when we think about reporting like race or ethnicity, you want to make sure you're not just going with what is the most dominant on top and then having the minorities at the bottom. You're being more intentional about the choices you're making when you order data.
Meta, as somebody who creates surveys and does data visualization coming out of the survey, I have seen in myself a tendency to go with the order of categories as they were presented in the survey, but that's not meaningful to anybody except for me as the survey designer. And so, as someone who's trying to aim to do user-centered data visualization, it's important to add that additional step where you take yourself away from the survey and the order of things in the survey, and you order intentionally, as you're saying. I've seen many examples of data visualization where the designer just hasn't had a chance or hasn't taken that step away from the data source.
Yeah, thank you. Also depends on the story you want to tell, right? Maybe your story is about a particular group, and so you want to highlight that group among the other categories or options. Using color intentionally, this again is something that is not always used as well as it can be, right? Like instead of taking the default color theme in your Excel chart or whatever you're working in, is to really think about how do I want to use colors, right? So thinking about a color palette for your chart. We also tend to have associations with different colors, right? For us, like different colors tend to mean different things. So thinking about those as well as you decide what color you want to use for what part of your chart. And in this particular example, the idea really is to highlight your main story again using color. So you're guiding the viewer's attention, and by using gray, you're really kind of making the orange pop even more. So, right, so if your story really is about illicit drug use, say for in this case, you want to really highlight that, and color is a nice way of doing that. And by graying the other things, you're making sure that the audience really goes there. So in your title as well as in the chart itself, using color can be really powerful and again, very quickly convey the point you want to make. Okay, Sophie, over to you.
Okay, this is a good segue from the color has meaning across different societies, and we often want to use kind of standard color schemes to illustrate our point. And to that point, the stoplight, traffic light, red, amber, green color scheme is used very, very broadly. I mean, if you Google traffic light color scheme, data visualization, you will come up with thousands and thousands of dashboards and data visualizations that contain it. But a part of doing equitable data visualization is ensuring that your data visualizations are accessible. And about 8%, I think, of the population, it's 1 in 8 men live with color vision deficiency. So this trait is far less common in women, but among folks who it's not just folks. Anyway, among men, color blindness is fairly widespread, and so the chart, the picture on the left here is obviously a picture of, I think that they are wild strawberries, and the picture on the right is shows us using a colorblind simulator, color blindness simulator, what that picture would look like for somebody with red-green color blindness. And if you are not a person who lives with color blindness, then it's really easy to move through the world completely oblivious to color blindness and to create data visualizations that seem just fine to you and very compelling indeed, but are not going to be accessible to a fairly large number of your users. So this is just to say there are lots of tools out there that you can use to ensure that the color palette you've selected is accessible. And VizCheck is one. It's kind of an old one. There's also color blindness, or Coblis, I think it's called. Anyway, if you take a look on the internet, you'll find lots and lots of places where you can do an accessibility check for your data visualizations, and color, making sure that the color palette is accessible is just it's one part of that, checking for accessibility. And another element of accessibility is contrast. So this is really just a screenshot from a color contrast checker. Um, when I'm making data visualizations, I will just run my visualization through a contrast checker. It's not just useful for visualizations, but also for, PowerPoint presentations you may be creating, or if you're doing a little bit of web design, this is critical in order to make sure that your design is accessible. And here we can see we've got like this blue background color, and depending on the component, the element that you want to make white, if it's a big white splotchy thing, that might be just fine. But if it's small text on the blue background, it's not going to be the contrast is not adequate to folks who might have visual impairments. So it's really important to use these tools so that our data visualizations can be effective and accessible. Meta, I think is this one over to you or no?
I mean, we can both speak to it. If you want to start, you can.
Sure. Okay, so now we're getting into decluttering. Once we've identified the story that we want to tell, we've sorted our data, etc. We've made sure that it is that the color scheme that we've used is accessible, that the contrast is adequate. We usually want to go into our data visualizations and just declutter, and one of the ways we do that is by making sure that that the axis labels, by removing labels, basically. So here you can see there's y-axis labels. There are grid lines as well, and there are data labels for each of the columns in this column chart. And there's also two percentage or two decimal places in the percentages that are shown. So, and I don't really love the title. So if I were a designer who wanted to compare CO2 emissions across these different countries, I would either choose to I would get rid of those lines, they're not necessary. And I would choose either to label my columns or to label my y-axis. We don't need both of those things, those elements of this chart to be labeled. And I would think carefully about the level of precision that my data can actually support and that is needed for this audience. And I would probably just go with no decimal places in this case. So just thinking about how can you declutter to make the point that, and I would also reorder probably, but how do you declutter to make your point really pop and reduce the visual sort of distraction? I think it's quite important.
Yeah, thanks, Sophie. Yeah, the reason I wanted to put this chart was because I've seen this in so many charts where people will use y-axis labels as well as data labels, and it doesn't help add information, right? Like one or the other, depending on what you think. Like I would probably go with the data label, but it just increases so much like visual load. So really, like again, we've been saying is to how can you make it most accessible, most compelling, and just easy for people to understand. And this is one very easy way of doing it. It doesn't require a lot of effort. Yeah, actually easy because you just need to remove the axis label, but it can make a big difference when you're looking at charts.
This is a nice example of decluttering again. So on the left-hand side, you've got a chart with a legend, and on the right-hand side, you've got that same chart, but the legend has been removed, and instead, each of the lines is labeled. And the use of color here is really nice too. It just makes the chart so much clearer and more readily comprehensible. I look at the chart on the right and I feel like I can understand something about what the data is telling me. And I look at the chart on the left and I'm trying to make associations between the legend. I'm looking back and forth between the line and the legend, and we don't want our the audiences of our charts to have to do that work.
Yeah. The other thing I'll quickly add is there's no picture for this, but sometimes I've also seen charts. Like the previous example I had was a chart where there was a legend and there was a data label. Right? And that again is just adding clutter because if you have a data label already, you don't really need a legend. So I know sometimes it's like, oh, but you need to have legends. If you have labels, then you don't. So it's also about being more intentional about which one you want to keep, and again, decluttering.
3D charts. They look kind of cool. I caught my husband making one the other day, and he's not a person who makes charts very often. He's a brilliant guy, but not a chart maker. And he showed me this data visualization he'd made with the 3D chart, and I had to say, why is it 3D? And he said, because it's so cool. But it's actually much harder for a user of a data visualization to be able to get a sense of how long like how tall each of these columns is when you have that 3D element. So we just completely avoid use of 3D charts. I don't even know why 3D is an option in data visualization tools, but it is. It's just much less user friendly than a plain old 2D chart.
Okay, and now we thought we would love to hear from all of you. This is an example of a chart that has scope for improvement. So we wanted to ask you, would you have any ideas for how this chart can be improved? Any suggestions for what we can do? And you can write in the chat or you can even unmute.
No 3D.
Too many colors. Eliminate legend. Nice ideas. Awesome reorder. No need for the grid lines on the table. Weird angle, move it so it isn't at an angle. Oh, interesting. Make it horizontal. Are you still talking about the angle when you mean make it horizontal?
I'm guessing.
Yeah. No need for the black frame. Awesome. More descriptive title. These are great.
Yeah.
Yes, without the angle. Okay, awesome. Okay, I'm going to go on and show this. So this again is from Stephanie Evergreen's data visualization checklist. We highly recommend you using this checklist. It's available for free on her website. You can just download it, and it gives a very nice detailed sort of checklist of things to look out for, things to do, not do. And so this is an example from there, which we found pretty funny. And so this is the way that she recommends fixing this chart. And I think a lot of it is what people said in the chat already, right? So a descriptive title and a subtitle to give more context. It's reordered. You don't have a legend, but you're labeling directly. There's data points. It's not 3D. There's action color to really talk about, okay, what am I trying to say? And if you look closely, you'll realize that the color is also related to the title. So in the title itself, there's color being used, and that same color is reflected in the chart to drive home a point. There's category labels, and there's data labels. So like if I'm just going back again, like from here to here. And like it's amazing how just keeping in mind some basic principles, what it can do for your data visualization and how much easier and more accessible and powerful this chart is compared to this. It's more colorful, but that's all I can really say about it. Okay. Yeah, this was a big like whoa moment when I saw this for the first time. I was like, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, and the second chart, this is another example of a really like I was looking for, like bad chart type examples, and I was mind blown when I saw this. Um, so if anybody has any comments about this pie chart and what are the things that are wrong with it? It's confusing. If you're just like, what is this? I understand because it is very confusing.
It's so wrong that it's hard to know where to begin in articulating it.
And doesn't it add up to more than 100%?
Yes. Yes, I think everything is wrong. in the chart. Shireen has a great point.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's not the whole that it's dividing into parts is not obviously a whole. It's trying to talk
yeah.
about change over time. The the time periods are not consistent. It's confusing in many ways.
Yeah, like as I said, pie chart is just the wrong chart for this. You would not convey this information through a pie chart. And like I reset, like it's just it doesn't make any sense. And I was amazed because this is like, it's not some back of beyond sort of report. This is like a news channel's sharing information, you know, on television to everybody. So I was kind of amazed at how bad this was, but also shows that it's so prevalent. Like effective data visualization is not the default always. So I just thought that was really funny.
Yeah.
Yes.
It also just proves the point that data visualization it makes things seem credible.
Hmm.
So you see a chart with numbers and you think this must be true. And so there's a lot of responsibility for us as people who make data visualizations to make sure that our data visualizations are not just effective, but they're also grounded in useful, I want to use the word truth, in evidence, and that they're bringing that evidence to life in a way that is responsible. Because I feel like this chart is not responsible.
Yeah, agreed.
Cedric's
Um,
calling it visual villainy, which I find funny. Yeah.
yeah, so this was an example. I'm sure you'll find many of these if you look it up, but Sophie's right. Even things that I've seen a lot on news is we don't have to get into it now, but like the y-axis is truncated. So it'll say 0, 10, and then suddenly it'll go to 100, which makes also very deceptive visualizations. But yeah, there's a lot of things that you can do wrong. Um, okay. We spoke about practices for effective data visualization, and now we'll get into a little bit more about, again, practices for equitable data visualization, and they're not separate from each other. A lot of the things that we spoke about are valid here. Like in all, effective data visualization should be equitable data visualization, right? But we wanted to call on some particular practices and principles to consider, especially when you're focusing on equity. So the first one is consult with people and communities involved in your research and data project. This is something that Sophie spoke about in the beginning as well. When you're thinking about user-centered analysis, it's really important to consult with the users, to consult with the communities whose data you're using, whose stories you're telling, and making sure they're involved. And we spoke about this in our previous workshops as well, right? It's not like they're just involved when you think about data visualization, but it's important to involve your communities when you're in the planning stage of your data project, when you're thinking about what is the data I want to collect? How do I want to collect it? How do I want to design my survey and my instruments? So it's important to keep your communities involved. Critically examine your data. And that basically means asking questions like who was included in the data? Whose voice am I hearing? Right? How was this data collected? Who's missing from this data? So asking all of those questions. Prioritizing the needs of your audience and the rights and dignity of the people whose data you're handling. Again, we spoke about this before as well. Using people first language. So people with disabilities, women of color, right? Like making sure that the way we're naming groups is very intentional and is people first. Consider missing groups. Again, is this data representative? Right? If I look at the whole population that I'm serving and I look at the sample of the survey that I have, is it actually representative or are there groups whose voices are not being shown in this data? And it's important to just call this out, right? Like to know it, be aware of it, and also to state it. That could just be a limitation in this report, right? Like maybe you weren't able to hear from this group because of this reason. It's important to just be transparent about it. Carefully consider colors, icons, shapes, and imagery. Make sure that what we're doing, we're being very cognizant that we're not being discriminatory, we're being sensitive to all the groups we're talking about, we're not using any icons, colors, or shapes that could be discriminatory or stereotypical or reinforce any sort of harm. Anything to add, Sophie?
Well, Meta, you gave a really good example, or you found a good example of a chart that was comparing, I think, results from men and results from women, and the women bar was in pink and the men
Mm,
bar was in blue.
blue.
And it just felt, first of all, very binary, but also infantilizing and weird.
Very true. So again, like carefully considering colors, icons, shapes, and imagery, not just for accessibility in terms of like color blindness, but also for stereotypes. And then coming to disaggregation, right? And especially when we're collecting social identity data, disaggregation is something we speak about, right? And it is, an important part of gender-based analysis plus, but it can be really hard to do well. So just a few things to keep in mind is one, disaggregate based on your research question and your objectives, right? So don't compare groups just for the sake of comparison. Really think about what are my research questions and objectives? What am I hoping to get out or learn from it, from this data, and disaggregate based on that. Use small cell size suppression to protect privacy. And what this means is that so when you have data and you're kind of dividing it into like sometimes categories, especially when you're working with minority or small groups, you might have sample sizes that go less than 5 or less than 10, right? And small size suppression helps protect privacy. If you're working with a small sample size and you have, say, a category of people who identify as bisexuals, and that category is, I mean, there's maybe like 3 people in the data, right? Or people from a particular background or race, or even age. The minute the category becomes really, really tiny, the chances of being able to identify who that person is increase, right? So small size suppression ensures that we are protecting privacy. And we usually, like less than 5 is a nice practice, but based on, you could also decide to suppress less than 10. So in that case, instead of saying this category is equal to 3, it'll just say less than 5. And
Right.
Sophie can show that an example.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that we'll show an example when we get into the demo. I think StatCan suppresses cells that are smaller than 10, but they have obviously a huge survey population, a huge sample. For most nonprofits, will go at smaller than 5.
Avoid use of percentages when numbers are very small. This can be very misleading, right? So supposing you have a sample size of 20 people, and in that case, to say something like 25% of the population feel or of our participants feel that can be very misleading because it's just 5 people, right? So it's hard to extrapolate that to your entire participants. So just avoid using percentages when numbers are very small. Use intersectional analysis only if you have adequate sample sizes. Ensure that no single person can be identified by a combination of traits. So again, this becomes about, again, working with smaller numbers. If you say, okay, this person who is from this area is male, is a person of color, plus this, plus that, and you do a lot of intersectional analysis, you could come down to just a few people, which then again makes the chance of identifying a person high. So you want to make sure that when you're doing this analysis, you're being very responsible and aware of what are the sample sizes I'm working with, what do I really need to know, and how much disaggregation is really necessary. So instead of doing it by multiple, uh, what do you call it, variables, you could just pick one, maybe two. Interpreting results with frontline staff and community when you're again telling, so you have numbers, but you need to have stories from the numbers that you want to communicate, making sure you're really involving staff and community into what stories you want to tell. What is the narrative that you're creating around this, and making sure again that you're avoiding deficit framing, you're not reinforcing stereotypes, you're telling stories in a way that honors the peoples, that's appreciative, and yeah, that you're just being very careful about the narratives that you're building with numbers, because numbers can be used in also harmful ways. So we want to be very careful and responsible when we're sharing stories.
We've talked already about the risk of stigmatizing an entire community with with a poorly designed data visualization, and that is not the kind of work that we want to do. So, and Ship has also given some really great presentations to make good points about the way that data can be used to do harm, and we don't want to use data to do harm. So I think part of involving staff and community is checking the stories that you're telling, checking your framing, making sure that people feel good about the way that the story is being told, even if it's a difficult story.
Yeah, there was this quote that I read which basically said, how would I feel if I was a data point in that visual chart, right? So asking yourself that question can be one tiny check that you do. Okay, and this comes to working well with small sample sizes. Again, talking about what, how can we make meaningful results even when we have small sample sizes. So what I'm talking about in this particular slide is from a blog post on We All Count. We All Count is a really great resource. If you haven't checked it out, you really should. Again, it's going to be listed in our resources. And this particular issue is very relevant, right? Because it again comes back to when you're designing your survey and you have different categories. We want to make sure we're being representative, right? We want people to feel like they have agency to identify themselves in a way that they feel represented, they feel included. But what can happen is sometimes if we have many, many, many categories, we get very small sample sizes. And those small sample sizes make it hard to have results with a lot of statistical significance. So for example, if you have a sample of say 50 people, in this example they use sexual orientation, and say that you have just maybe one or two people who identify as bisexual, pansexual, or asexual. Now to say that this group represents the entire participants sample that you serve can be risky. So what can we do in that case, right? Like it has risks. So one option you could do is collapse categories. So this could be in other questions as well. But say, okay, I'm going to take the smaller categories, combine them into one category so I can have a number that's slightly larger and with a little more statistical power. But that can be very risky because you're removing how people chose to identify themselves, right? You're taking that agency away from them when we collapse categories. The second thing is we're reproducing a very harmful, this is normal, this is typical versus other framing, which again, we really want to avoid. And you're also reducing accuracy by ignoring differences within these groups, right? So even when you have small sample sizes, it's possible that their experiences are very, very different. And when you collapse them into one group, we're also reducing accuracy and reducing their voice and what they said. If we don't collapse categories, one thing is, yes, we maintain integrity, we respect how people chose to identify themselves, but we also have a low statistical confidence that can weaken findings, which basically means that, if a larger group has a few hundred people, the way that we can interpret that data is going to be different from how we interpret a data with maybe like 5 or 6 people, right? So it reduces the confidence when you're analyzing that data, and also risk of over interpreting small size data, right? Like the experience of 2 people may not speak to the experiences of a whole larger community. So this is very tricky, and just some ideas we have for what can we do in these cases. One is decide how you want to deal with this while crafting your survey before you actually reach the analysis. If your survey is going to be with a very small group of people, try to have fewer categories, right? And also be very upfront about how you're going to be dealing with categories. You can report your results in more than one way. It's possible that for some questions, a lot of the categories that have small sample sizes say similar things and you want to show them as one group. In some cases, you might want to show it uncollapsed. In some ways, you can have combined perspectives. So it really is about what is the story again you want to tell and what is the best way of showing that. So you can have more than one way of dealing with it. And lastly, really be transparent about it. Like talk about this is the limitation with this data. This is the voice that we're hearing. These are the sample sizes. These are the decisions we've made. This is why we've made them. right? So being really upfront, really honest with your community, your audience about what you did and why you did it, and the limitations with that. There's nothing. It's more honorable to be transparent and honest than to try and make something that looks good or feels better rather than what is actually the right way of doing it. Anything to add, Sophie?
I would just say that there's no shame in small numbers. And even if you were less success, you had a lower response rate than you wanted. Still, the people who shared their data with you shared their data with you, and so there's something meaningful. It's usually something meaningful that can be said based on the data that has been shared. It's just really critical, as that last point makes, to frame it, to frame whatever you say appropriately, and to caveat it by being really transparent about your your sample size. Okay, I think we're ready to do our demo.
Yes, we have about 10 minutes.
Okay, that's great. I just wanted to share a dashboard that our team had made in the past, several years ago now, actually, and just talk about the process of creating the dashboard and take questions about it. Let's go in. Shall we go into that? I'm also tempted to ask folks if there's things that they would want to talk about or ask or questions based on the presentation so far. But why don't I give myself 5 minutes for the demo, and then we can have a conversation and people can ask questions and share examples of things that have worked well for them. So
Yeah.
give me a sec.
And while Sophie's pulling up the demo, if you also have questions right away, you can put them in the chat. We can get to them afterwards, but it will be great to hear from you. Even if you have comments, not questions, something that resonated with you or something that you agree with or disagree with, anything, please feel free to put it in the chat.
I'm just moving things around here so that I can see everything I want to see. Okay.
Yeah, that's better, Sophie. It's nice and big.
Okay. Okay, good. So this is, first of all, this is all made up data. It's what I want to show today is just it's dummy data. For that reason, some of the numbers don't actually make a lot of sense, so apologies for that. But this is a demo version of a dashboard that our team made for Ontario Trillium Foundation. From 2020 to 2024, we had a project with OTF to create an outcomes measurement system, an evaluation system consisting of a number of different surveys and dashboards that OTF grantees could use to collect and interpret data coming from their participants, mostly outcomes data, but also some client experience data and some qualitative data around impact and what have you. So we, of course, we built this entire system incredibly quickly. As we generally have in our sector, we had some unrealistic timelines, and we did our very best to meet the milestones in our plan. And we got, I think it was 18 different surveys, one for each grant result, in some cases more than one for each grant result in place. We got these dashboards together. It took a long time to build the original dashboards for the system, but we pushed it through. We put them in place. I didn't feel wonderful about them, but they were the best that we could do with the resources and time that we had. That's not what we're looking at right now. I'm just telling you the larger story. And then I started using the dashboards with the grantees who were using the system. So I was privileged enough to be the evaluation coach on that platform. And one of the main things that I got to do was sit down with grantees and look at their results together. And very quickly I realized, oh, these dashboards that we've designed, they're not getting people the answers that they want quickly. So all of the grantees, the organizations receiving funding from OTF, they were required to use our system in order to gather evaluation data. They had to, as part of their granting requirements, they actually had to collect survey data. And so the first thing everybody wanted to know was how many responses are in the system? How was I successful in administering the survey? Did people actually respond? And so we actually, through the process, after having used our initial reports for maybe 6 months, probably fewer than that actually, with grantees, we decided to completely redesign them. So this is the second version of the report that we made based on that. Really, it was a co-design process. And so on our first page of the report, we worked with a designer at OTF who had some great ideas as well. And we totally revamped the report. So on the first page, immediately as a grantee using this report, you can figure out, okay, how many responses should I be aiming to collect from this population that I'm serving, and how many responses have come into the system. We have this nice little timeline here so you can see when the responses came into the system, and we had some KPIs with those big numbers, just to kind of whet one's appetite. Like, what are some of the outcomes I can see in this dashboard illustrated, and what's some good news potentially from my program. On the second page here, it's a multi-page report because the surveys were, had some complexity to them. We used some drop-down charts because the surveys were configurable, and so not all grantees chose to include all of the measures in the survey. It was a menu of measures, and this allows us to accommodate that approach. And we used bar charts throughout to compare outcomes. Sorry about that tooltip. Outcomes at the beginning, like that were measured at a pre-survey, to outcomes achieved by the end of the program. So little contact, some contact, many contacts. And we went through this very, very iterative process of designing to meet the needs and goals of the user. One thing I found, there's a lot of text in this report, and I don't really love to show a lot of text, but in this case I found that the users were having trouble connecting the charts and tables that we'd included in our dashboards with the measures that were in the survey. And so, and they weren't always sure about the measures that were in the survey and why they were there and how to interpret the data coming out of that. And so, so it took a lot of care to be really clear about what's the connection between this chart I'm looking at and that measure that we asked in the survey, what kind of choices have been made around reporting here. And I'll just mention that all of the charts are filterable. So, and these filters, it's a demo, so there you go. The numbers don't quite work, but we were able, when working with real data, to find some really important patterns around sense of belonging, for example, and how that might differ between the women and non-binary folks who are being served by a program and the men who are being served by a program. I'll just clear my filters. And finally, because this project's all around social identity data, one of the most useful pages of this report is right here, the respondent information page. And I would spend a lot of time here with grantees looking at the kind of socio demographic composition of their sample, the people who responded to the survey, and we would figure out together, to what extent is this representative of the population that you serve. Often we would see that women were overrepresented in the sample and men were underrepresented. And so we'd ask ourselves, what can we do to encourage more of the men who you serve to fill in this survey? How can we make it easier for them to share their information with you so that you have a better sense of the outcomes that they're achieving through the work you're doing? And just around gender, there were 3 gender categories that were included as kind of checkboxes in the survey, and then an open-ended prefer to self-identify text box. And all of the information that was entered into that text box would show up in this box in the report. In this case, there isn't any data there, but what I saw was that many people would take a lot of time to really explain what their data or what their gender identity was. And that was really useful, especially for groups serving youth who really weren't clear on how the youth they served identified. And so it was wonderful to receive that information in this form. Although there are choices that we're making here, they're not always the perfect choice. That tended to work very well. So maybe I'll just end it off there, Medha.
I just wanted to quickly talk about small cell suppression.
Oh, yes, yes, you're right. Here it is. It's in action right here. And so in a dashboard like this, if we go back, we're looking at outcomes around sense of belonging. You can see this is a cell in a table, right? And if I were to put in without the small cell size suppression, I can filter my data in various ways. So I could click on a number of different variables, and depending on the number of people I serve, it would be quite easy for me to identify a respondent based on a combination of characteristics and see what is their sense of belonging. I could see their data, their results. We didn't want that in this the system. We wanted to protect people's privacy, and so we just put small cell size suppression in place, and so we're not able to click down to identify an individual.
Thank you.
Okay, I can stop sharing. And if folks have questions or they want to, let me open the chat.
Yeah. I think the only thing we had left was the resources.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's helpful to look at them, but I could share that. Yeah, if folks have any questions, comments, that would be great. These slides are going to be shared on the website along with the recording, so please go check out these resources. They're really, really great. They've been really helpful for us, and we hope they'll be helpful for you as well. Oops. Okay, awesome. And the last slide has a feedback form. It has our email address. If you'd like to get in touch with us, please do. And this QR code is a feedback form for the workshop. So if you have any comments about this workshop, how we can improve the workshop, what you liked, didn't like, please let us know.
Cedric, thank you for sharing those resources. That's great. Yeah, if folks have resources that they love and you want to drop them in the chat, that would be greatly appreciated. And Keishan, I think we have a link to the feedback form that people could just click on and open up in their web browser. So, Keishan, if you have that handy and can drop it into the chat, that would be great.
All right, just give me 1 second.
Yeah, I have. I should have that too. 1 second. Okay, thanks everyone for replying in the chat. I'm glad this was helpful. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I've put the feedback form chat in link in the chat if you want to fill it from there.
Wonderful.
Okay. We can stay back a little bit if people have questions or comments, but otherwise, thank you so much all for joining today, and we hope to see you next time.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, awesome. I think we can stop recording. We're still recording.
Let's stop recording.
I just wanted to quickly say congratulations. That was great.
Oh,
I was
good.
listening the whole time. I know to make technical exciting and sexy, you guys did it. It was very engaging, very, very good. So just wanting to stay back just to congratulate both of you.
Thank
It's not
you,
easy what
Sol.
you do. So yeah,
Oh, much appreciated. Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you.
And I love the cleanup because I know I've seen other versions, and so you guys really made it feel smooth. So well
That's
done.
that's
Thank you
great.
for
And
your feedback.
thank
Yeah.
you for your
Yeah.
feedback. Yeah,
Yeah.
it really helps us
Really great.
to make these things better.
Oh, great. And I think there's just some emails that Kodat and Casa sent over just on terms of, there's some elements of the workshop today, how you would want to bring it in. But we just want to acknowledge that the time is a bit shorter because we are having two agencies present. So, yeah, but just wanting to.
Do you have any suggestions about that? Like, was there something we
Yeah.
looked at today that we could revisit that might be interesting, or something else we could touch on?
Sorry, can we stop recording?
I was gonna say we're still recording.
Oh.
Keishan, can you stop recording? And when you upload this, can you remove the
Yeah, we'll remove it,
chat?
Yeah, please edit it.
It's still recording. I think Keishan has to be the one to stop it because I cannot.
No.
It's okay. We could take this conversation offline, but we'll think about it then. Okay. Thank you, guys.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you
Okay.
very much.
All right.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.